Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rabbi Jenni Greenspan for Congregation Beth-El Zedek. I'll welcome you to this morning's Torah talk. I'll give us a few moments for everyone to log on. And as usual, if you need a copy of the Etz Chaim Chumash in scan, it is on our website, bez613.org, under virtual resources and Torah talk. So good morning, Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, Jim. I see I've got Jim Ross so far. I'm sure others will be joining us soon, and we'll wait a couple minutes and then we will get started. We have a double Torah portion this morning. We'll focus on one but mention something briefly from the other so we see them both. And Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, Alan Hamburger. Good to see you too. Give us just a minute. Hope everyone's having a happy 4th of July morning so far, and we'll be able to get out and enjoy the sunshine later this afternoon. It looks like we're going to have a nice bright day. Even if we don't have any community firework gatherings, we can still have a happy and celebratory day later on. Shabbat Shalom and good morning to my dad. Good to see you. And I'll give it 30 more seconds. Again, if you'd like to get a copy of the scan of Chukat Balak is our double Torah portion this morning. It is under the Shabbat resources on the BEZ 613 Beth-El Zedek's website, bez613.org. We'll join soon. And Shabbat Shalom to my mom too. You both logged on. Good morning. Very early morning over in the West Coast. Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, Phyllis Luger. I'm glad to see so many joining us today. So as I said this morning, we have a double Torah portion, Chukat and Balak, and these two Torah portions are both jam-packed. There's a lot that happens between the two, so I highly recommend just reading it for the drama on your own later, but I'm going to focus on one of the few stories that happens in this Torah portion, which is in the first of the two Parashat Chukat. This is the one that if we were reading in person, we would be reading in the triennial cycle, though we are on two Torah portions this morning, since our triennial focuses on the earlier part of the earliest third of the three this year. So we are on Chukat. I'm going to be reading from Numbers chapter 20. So if you are following along in the Etz Chaim Chumash, that begins on page 883. And if you are using a different, just Tanakh or a different Chumash, it is the book of Numbers chapter 20, and I'll start with verse 1, so no need to go searching for a different verse. And good morning. Welcome, Cheryl, too. Good to see you. And let's go ahead and start. So our Israelites are wandering in the desert. Just the background, we're wandering in the desert, and most of the commentators believe that this begins the final year of wandering before the Israelites will be gearing up to enter into the land at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, which will be our next book, which will start, I think, in 2 weeks. So 3 weeks. We'll be starting soon. So the Israelites arrived in a body at the wilderness of Zin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. The community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses, saying, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished at the instance of the Lord. Why have you brought us to the Lord's congregation? Why have you brought the Lord's congregation into the wilderness for us and our beasts to die there? Why did you make us leave Egypt, bring us to this wretched place, a place with no grain or figs or vines or pomegranates? There is not even water to drink." By the way, those are all going to be things that they will have when they eventually make it to the land, but they don't in the desert. Moses and Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. The presence of the Lord appeared to them, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus you shall produce water from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts." Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels. Shall we get water out of this rock?" And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. Those are the waters of Meribah, meaning that the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, through which he affirmed his sanctity, the waters." So this is a very famous passage, a very strange passage, where the people are without water, and they are told they're complaining to Moses and Aaron, and God tells Moses and Aaron, to speak to the rock, and instead of speaking to it, Moses insults the community and hits the rock, and the community does still get the water, but Moses and Aaron end up punished and are not permitted to enter the land of Israel. Aaron will die toward the end of this Torah portion, Chukat, and Moses will die at the end of the last Torah portion of Deuteronomy, right before we move into the book of Joshua, into our prophets, and the Israelites move into the land of Israel finally. And so I actually don't want to focus on the water story itself. There's a lot going on here. We could talk quite in depth at whether the punishment fits the crime or anything along those lines. We could ask, why is it that God even tells Moses to take along the rod if he's only to speak to the rock? There's a lot going on there. And I actually want to focus on something that just at the beginning that is probably easy to miss with the drama of the story itself, and that is the end of verse 1. Miriam died there and was buried there. And then verse 2, the community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. And that launches the whole story. And it is not clear, the Torah often doesn't give us passage of time information the way a modern literary writer might. It is not clear how much time elapses between verse 1 and verse 2. But it seems to be pretty quick, and it seems to be related. Many of the commentaries will link that to the reason that there is no water. Miriam's death is the reason that there is no water, is one of the reasons that a lot of the commentaries point to. There's a famous midrash in the Gemara, in the Talmud, that says there were 3 gifts that followed the Israelites throughout their wanderings on the merits of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. That because of Moses, the people had a pillar of cloud and of fire that led them around. Because of Aaron, they had the manna, the miraculous food. And because of Miriam, they had this miraculous well that meant that they always had water. And so that midrash is picking up on the fact that when Miriam dies, we suddenly have no water. And that is a famous juxtaposition and a famous midrash that could be why the people suddenly are without water. But I think that there's something else that often gets skipped over in this juxtaposition, which is explaining Aaron and Moses' reaction. Because Aaron and Moses have just lost their big sister. To the people, Miriam was the woman who led them through the split seas when they left Egypt in song and in dance, and she was a woman who was regularly present in singing and gathering people. But to Moses and Aaron, she was their sister. To Moses, she was his protector, the one who got him into the river and into the Pharaoh's palace so that he lived past infancy. And then we immediately after her death see the people shouting at Moses and Aaron and demanding them to find a way to give them water. And so I wonder if Moses and Aaron's reactions are not out of grief. We see a moment in verse 6 of them going away from the congregation and falling on their faces. Last week I pointed out Moses doing that when Korach came against him, as a moment of prayer and a moment of trying to step back and figure out what to do. And God tries to tell Moses what to do. But because Moses and Aaron have not been given any opportunity to grieve, or perhaps, as a friend pointed out, maybe they didn't take the opportunity to grieve. When Aaron's sons die, Moses tries to tell Aaron to go straight back to work, business as usual. Doesn't really allow Aaron, the chance to mourn his sons. And perhaps they're not taking the time for themselves. It happens a lot with grief that people either choose not to take the time and try to avoid their grief and go back to life as usual, or others just come in and don't recognize they need the time to grieve. And I wonder if perhaps that is the reason that Aaron and Moses lost control here. Because we all need time to grieve when we have things to grieve. Right now, a lot of us are grieving, whether truly for a person or grieving the opportunity to be with a friend who is grieving a loved one. We may be just grieving our life as we remember it just 6 months ago. But we all need to give ourselves, whenever we have a reason to grieve, the time to do so. Because that is what can lead to this explosion, this loss of control that led Moses and Aaron to go to a place where God couldn't forgive them, go to a place where God couldn't allow them into the land. And again, we could just debate whether that's a fair consequence. But later on in Deuteronomy, when Moses is recapping the story, he ends up blaming the Israelites for this, though it is his own action of hitting the rock rather than speaking to it. So perhaps he is still carrying a certain amount of bitterness for not being given the opportunity to mourn, that the people are immediately jumping in and saying, you need to get us water. So I think this Torah portion also can give us a reminder to let ourselves grieve, to reach out to people who are grieving. Don't try to immediately expect them to push it away, and don't try to push away your own grief and pretend it isn't there. I mentioned that this is a double Torah portion this week. We move ahead into the second portion that we look at this week. Balak has one of the most famous lines. It's chapter 24, verse 5 in the Etz Chaim. It's on page 904. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. How good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling spaces or your prayer spaces, Israel. That when we remember to allow ourselves to grieve, we also open our hearts and our homes to one another, that we reach out to one another the moment we may not be physically in one another's homes, and yet we still are able to reach out to one another's homes and to be there for one another. So my blessing as we move into the summer is that we have an opportunity, give ourselves the time to step back and grieve if we need to, and to reach out and open our homes to one another and make sure that we are supporting one another rather than hurting one another and tearing one another down. Thank you for joining me. I'll say Shabbat Shalom again. You see, we were joined Shabbat Shalom to Marty Lip, to Carol Steinfeld, and to Margot May. Shabbat Shalom. Good to see all of you. I hope we all have a wonderful and happy 4th of July, even with a little bit of a downer sermon. It was just, this was what I felt like we needed to be reminded of today. So I hope we all have a happy 4th of July, and good opportunities to reach out to one another and to give ourselves the time and space that we need. Shabbat Shalom. I will see you next week. I hope you join at 10:30 with Cantor Melissa for Shabbat Chance Encounters. See you soon.